It's 11:11. Make a wish.
All right, the neurodivergence year in review. So, in this first segment, we're going to let Luna take us into the fascinating world of ADHD. I feel like we've been there a little bit. And the groundbreaking research that took place in 2023. Luna, are you ready to explore these exciting findings?
Absolutely, Shelly. ADHD has been a mutual special interest of ours for a while, but the developments, no pun intended, in 2023 seem particularly promising. Our first highlight is from a study using artificial intelligence to analyze brain MRI scans. Now, before I actually go into the information on that,
Wait. We're using our brains to look at our brains to better understand neurodivergent brains, but we're also training fake. Okay, what?
yeah, we're training fake brains to look at our brains. That's right. Also, I would put $1 million on these researchers being heavily autistic because this is like, yes. Okay. Anyhow, so researchers discovered significant differences in white matter tracts of adolescents with ADHD. This study, involving over 1,700 participants, used diffusion-weighted imaging and a deep learning AI to detect these variations. So we used our brain and their brains to look at the brains. Elevated fractional anisotropy, I can't say the word.
It looks like
Anisotropy?
anisotropy. Yeah, like, okay, so like entropy and
Anisotropy values were found in 9 white matter tracts, providing objective biomarkers for diagnosis. This could revolutionize how we diagnose ADHD, moving away from subjective, self-reported surveys. Imagine if we could just take a little snapshot of the brain and say, yep, that one there.
That's incredible how technology is advancing our understanding of these neurodevelopmental disorders.
Yes. So moving on to another intriguing study, researchers explored the link between screen time and genetic predispositions to both autism spectrum disorder, or ASD, and ADHD.
They're not trying to suggest this screen time cause of neurodivergence thing, are they?
No, actually, this study challenged that belief because it's been proposed that screen time might cause neurodivergence like ASD and ADHD. Instead, suggests it could just be an early indicator. So children genetically predisposed to ADHD and ASD showed increased screen usage, while those with ADHD tendencies increased screen time as they aged, however. In fact, science has identified several risk factors for ADHD beyond just screen time.
Oh, okay. So this is definitely a more nuanced perspective on the relationship between screen time and neurodevelopmental disorders. So maybe kids are adapting their use of screen time to help regulate any symptoms that they're experiencing from their neurodivergence, maybe?
Yes. So our next study kind of expands on that, and we look into the realm of distraction. So researchers identified a novel measure we are calling the D factor. Get your heads out of the gutter. This isn't BDE, this is distraction. So the D factor indicates a person's
wait. You took my line, but that's cool. What is this D factor?
The D factor is the distraction factor. You just distracted me. Good job. Good example, indicating a person's general propensity towards distraction and its potential connection to ADHD. So this D factor emerged from 3 primary types of distractions that they identified: external distractions, unwanted intrusive thoughts, and mind wandering. So the study showed a strong statistical correlation between the D factor and ADHD symptoms, as well as hyperfocus. This insight could pave the way for a deeper understanding of distractibility and ADHD.
Okay. So you mentioned these other risk factors for ADHD. Do those have to do with a D also, the distractibility?
Not necessarily, though to me it seems more to do with the substances and or environmental exposures that might affect the epigenetic expression of neurodivergence. So research identified several early signs that might help predict ADHD risks. They combined data from from pregnancy and birth, which again, machine learning technology, identifying 17 factors, including things like exposure to cigarette, smoking, recreational drugs, maternal infections, even, that predicted the number of ADHD symptoms in childhood.
Wow. So it's incredible now that we're learning how much prenatal and birth information can provide insights into these symptoms that manifest in ADHD.
Yep. So this study, based on the ongoing ABCD study, brings a new dimension
Oh my
to
God, I thought
predict.
that was a filler. It's actually called ABCD study.
No, it's a real study. Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Okay,
Not
continue.
filler. So it expands on this existing study that's ongoing and brings a new dimension to predicting and understanding how ADHD works. Now, Shelly, I swear you cannot get on social media these days without hearing about gut health.
Oh my God, no. Yes.
So I'm going to do it. Let's talk about the gut brain connection. I swear I'm not trying to sell anything, by the way. This study, though, obviously was like, okay, we're seeing all these trends on TikTok and all these people
Yeah.
trying to sell us. Let's
Right.
look into it.
Well,
So they
yeah.
did. So this study explored whether altered gut microbes affected the risk of ADHD. The Candida albicans species of gut bacteria were found to be abundant in children with ADHD, potentially creating the quote leaky gut, which is in quotations because this is not an accepted medical diagnosis. It's a term adopted by
chronically ill people.
And people making armchair philosophies and hypotheses. So potentially creating leaky gut and leading to inflammation throughout the body and the brain. It's real though.
It is, but correlation doesn't mean causation. Right?
Exactly. My next point is I think it's really important the researchers and those of us listening to this information don't lose sight of the fact that neurodivergent humans have different connective tissues. So this interplay between gut health and ADHD is very interesting. And the fact that we validated, hey, there are differences is important, but it's an emerging area of research. Understanding how the gut microbiome influences neurodevelopmental disorders or vice versa can really open up some new avenues for treatment.
Wow. All right. So we've also talked about advancements in the genetic understanding of the connective tissue disorders in the previous episodes. Were there any interesting studies on the genetics of ADHD?
Yes, of course there were.
Of course.
So a groundbreaking study identified 27 new gene variants associated with the development of ADHD specifically. So this study involved more than 6 million genetic variants and sheds light on the genetic architecture of ADHD. It emphasizes that ADHD should be seen as a brain developmental disorder. Keep in mind, we're using the word disorder in terms of it being a medical condition, not it being a disorder like that's a bad thing, with a major impact on the brain's early development.
Okay, so these studies and the research is finally catching up with what the community has been discussing.
Yes, indeed. The medical research is contributing collectively to our evolving understanding of ADHD, from its neurocorrelates to genetic underpinnings and early predictors.
Interesting. Okay, so we've touched on autism spectrum disorder a bit. What did we learn about ASD in 2023?
So some equally interesting stuff is coming up in the field of ASD research as well. Researchers have used really creative ways of expanding our understanding of autism, using everything from machine learning again, virtual reality, and even emotion reading AI. The profile of ASD is expanding too, as the research expands on the differences in the whole spectrum of autism, how we all experience it slightly differently. Shelli, just read through this list of things that they've linked to ASD in the last year for me.
And I want to let you know, I saw this and I was like, so I actually skipped over this. I actually did not read this list.
That's fair.
Because I figured you would want me to read it.
I intentionally wanted you to read it because it's just, you'll see.
Yeah. Okay. So a profile of autism spectrum disorder differences and the links expanding. Okay. Medical research linked several interesting things to autism, including parental infertility, altered brain connectivity, enlarged brain spaces called perivascular spaces, different language learning, and gray matter deficits related to language differences in how we experience the bystander effect. Luna, what's the bystander effect?
So it is a phenomenon of no one taking responsibility when something we see is concerning happening in a group setting. So if someone sees a stranger in a public setting, needs help, they think, oh, someone else will help, and they step back.
Okay. There's a Seinfeld episode about that. All right. Let's continue this very interesting list you have provided to me. Memory impairments, increased childhood ear, nose, and throat infections, poor sleep quality linked to fatty acids in blood plasma, higher lithium levels in the mother's drinking water, infant perception of movement, shape processing differences, cardiometabolic disease, toddler fluency with motherese, higher pain intensity experiences, smell perception differences, sound processing differences, different biomarkers in blood, and even cord blood. You go.
That's a lot, right? Okay, so the list of possible links makes it real easy to gloss over the nuance of identifying these statistics. So, for example, in the childhood ENT infection study, the conclusions are more nuanced than just saying these infections in toddlerhood cause autism spectrum disorder. So, for example, those researchers in that ear, nose, and throat infection study concluded that those associations they found may be important because, one, these ear and respiratory signs may be early markers of an increased risk of autism, or two, they may inform the origins of autism, or three, they may highlight co-occurring conditions that, if treated, may lead to a better quality of life for children with autism. And as you know, my favorite theory, the connectome theory, says that you cannot separate the issues from the tissues, meaning you are a neurodivergent human, you have tissue differences as well. So of course, it's a systemic issue with systemic health issues. So that's why that list makes me laugh.
I'm crying in Gen X here because and elder millennials, and I mean everybody,
I'm crying
really,
zebra.
but yeah, because I had chronic ear infections nonstop until I was 3, and then they put tubes in and took my tonsils out.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad smoked in the house, like all of those things. It's just.
And then by the time we get to my age, elder millennial, they were very against taking out tonsils. And I did not get my tonsils taken out until adulthood. In fact, my child was 9 months old when I had it done. My ENT.
My niece had it done when she was like 20. It's terrible.
And I had a 36-hour birth in the same year that I had my tonsils out. I would have rather given birth again than have my tonsils out. And my ENT was like, I've never seen tonsils so big. Anyhow.
So what has come from the genetic research on autism?
So several studies advanced our genetic understanding on the biology of ASD. There's several out there. I'm just going to go over a couple. So the SYN GAP SYNGAP1 gene is the first one. It showed us that this protein in progenitor cells appears sooner than what we thought, suggesting it affects neural circuitry earlier in development. So it's not just affecting your brain once it's developed, but literally from the onset of development. The RNFL146 gene affecting a disrupted neurotransmitter balance in the frontal lobe is a phenomenon we've seen in mouse models. And we've known for a while, that ASD humans have different neurotransmitter differences, and we have different frontal lobe biology and anatomy. And interestingly, a 20-year study, it's a very long time,
Wow.
from the Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory and 6,000 volunteer families showed something that some people were surprised about, but I was not, showed that a father's genetics are more influential in the development of autism spectrum disorder than a mother's. I wasn't really that surprised by that.
So I am surprised by that.
And I will say, however, I am fairly certain that I inherited autism from both sides of the family, but my mother's side is very much classic ASD, including my mother. So, not personally, but I'm not surprised.
So, also exciting are potential therapeutic options and treatments from the research. Were you done talking about that?
Yeah. No rat holes today.
What are some things we should know about?
So some highlights from potential therapies include a therapy utilizing inhibitors of 2 kinases proteins to trigger repairs in patients with Fragile X syndrome, which, by the way, the dominant expression happens on males, back to that other study. A sodium channel blocker that seems to help social differences in the MYT1L gene transcription change.
Okay.
And researchers developed an emotion sensing tool that uses wearable EEG and ECG sensors combined with facial analysis to interpret emotion using AI. I love your face right now.
It's your line. So I don't know what to say.
I know, right? I think that's funny because I could use I can use that right now to interpret what you're feeling. I have no idea what is going through Shelli's head. I want the AI help right now.
I don't think the AI would know. I've thought of 15 different things at least.
Probably 20. Have you ever used ChatGPT to translate? Okay, so speaking of using AI, I recently used ChatGPT often to translate neurotypical speech or emails to better understand them, or to know how to say something without being overly direct in a hurtful way. Just throwing that out there as a little hacking hypermobility life hack. So brain imaging, biomarkers, etc., and a better understanding of how we as neurodivergent humans experience the world will hopefully aid in earlier diagnosis eventually for more of us. Interestingly, statistics have found that there are geographic hotspots for increasing rates of ASD diagnosis. One of them is in the state of California, for example.
Okay.
There's some in the Northeast. There's some in other parts of the world as well.
Is this the whole chicken and egg thing again? And you know how I feel about that, because people forget that chickens weren't the first creatures to have eggs. So are we just getting better at diagnosing in certain places, or are there better resources to support getting diagnosed, or are there groups of people more genetically predisposed? What is going on here? Do you know? Answer me.
I think it's all of the above. But okay, so you can't see this, but our producer is giggling so hard. I can see her. But I can't hear.
Red. I'm sorry.
And I just know it's about the chicken or the egg thing. Tiffany, take yourself off mute. What are you laughing at?
Well, it was the chicken or the egg, and then she just starts like, "Is it this? Is it this? Answer me."
And I answer, I don't know the answer. It's both the chicken and the egg. But no, literally,
Kyle's
really.
had eggs first. Anyway.
It's our eggs. It's our eggs. Did you know? Okay, I am gonna rat hole on this one because eventually it'll get me
Are
to
you
the
talking
point.
about our grandmama's eggs?
Yes, I'm gonna talk about your grandmama's eggs. Okay.
Okay.
Did you know that when you were in your grandmother's womb, because yes, you were, what she experienced while your mother was an infant was passed on to your mother's body, which at the time held your eggs, so then was passed on to you. So that is an example of epigenetics. Chicken
I
and
love you,
egg,
Granny, but fuck that shit. Anyway,
right?
carry on.
Okay. So
Or was
one
it mine?
study does suggest that your ancestry influences your chances of being autistic. So certainly there are genetic clusters and epigenetic and environmental factors we just still don't fully understand yet. So the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control in the United States, tracks all sorts of health data, of course. One of my special interests, by the way, in case you don't know, it's my whole career. So the CDC data shows a notable shift in 2023. This is the very first year that their reports don't show a racial disparity in autism spectrum disorder diagnosis.
Wow.
Now, keep in mind, 2010 was the first time that white people were no longer the majority. 13 years later, now health is sort of catching up. Previously, the rate of children were diagnosed sooner and diagnosed at higher rates among white children than non-white children in the US. In 2023, the overall rates of ASD were consistently higher among Black children, 2.9%, Hispanic, 3.2%, and Asian or Pacific Islander, 3.3% children, compared to white children at 2.4%. I will say, however, the gender gap is quite wide, but 2023 was the first year the prevalence of autism exceeded 1% in girls.
Okay. I'm going to ask a question, and it is very rabbit hole-y. We are not going to rabbit hole. We're going to just have it recorded here for us to rabbit hole later. Do they have data on any shifts in other diagnoses decreasing during the same time frame?
That would be fascinating.
I think we need to rabbit hole that later. We're going to pigeonhole it now into the rabbit hole. We're going to hole it. And also, you guys don't know about beef hole yet. So I'm just going to go ahead and say beef hole. And you guys are both making a fantastic face. And I can't wait to tell you about it later. All right. So
I'm going to put obnoxious corporate speak in here. And I'm going to say, we're going to put a pin in that for later.
Oh, we're going to park it in the park.
Oh my God.
We're going to circle back. Do I have bingo yet? Okay. So it seems the defining autistic experience with more intersectional awareness is really helping to be more inclusive, right?
Answering your question, Shelli. Yes, and a study that is helping expand the understanding of autism spectrum disorder was published back in March in Nature Neuroscience that identified 4 different subtypes of ASD. So there was an interview published in Neuroscience News, and I just want to read some of that. New methods of machine learning that can deal with thousands of genes, brain activity differences, and multiple behavioral variations made this study possible, said co-senior author Dr. Logan Grosnick, an assistant professor of neuroscience in psychiatry at Weill Cornell Medicine, who pioneered machine learning techniques used for biological subtyping in the autism and depression studies. So this particular study used, again, another very large data set of neuroimaging to identify brain connectivity differences, and also use machine learning combined with that to explain these individual differences. So the team was able to identify 4 different unique subtypes of autism spectrum disorder. The study greatly validated the neurodivergent community, who has been advocating for the recognition of a diverse expression of autism. What's even cooler is that it continues to be validated with further study. So 2 of the groups that they identified had above average verbal intelligence, while one group had severe deficits or differences in social communication, but less repetitive behaviors, while the other had more repetitive behaviors and less social impairment. So,
Fascinating.
right?
Yeah.
And so, like, as you're thinking about it, I'm sure you can be like, oh, I know someone with that subtype versus this one. So, the connections between the parts of the brain that process visual information and help the brain identify the most salient incoming information were hyperactive in the subgroup with more social impairment, for example. These same connections, however, were weak in the group with more repetitive behaviors. So the behavior is being defined by the brain differences. So the other two groups had severe social impairments and repetitive behaviors, but had verbal abilities at the opposite ends of the spectrum. So, despite some behavioral similarities, the investigators discovered completely distinct brain connections in these two subgroups. So, then they analyzed gene expression and proteins within this data set. And most interestingly, were able to confirm the results on a second human data set. So they used the machine learning to identify these 4 subtypes, then got a whole new set of humans and boop, 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 did it again. So even more confirmation was found when unbiased text mining into the medical research studies already done, not at all related to this study, corroborated the identified behavioral traits in genes independent of their research.
I really look forward to their ongoing research and machine learning techniques because it's really validating to see what I can already do by like talking to somebody now. And anyway, it's nice to see that we're validating and it's being validated in the medical research community. Thank you for listening to Autistic People and their
There
caregivers.
is no supercomputer as effective as a human. You throw in an autistic human, and it's even more notably impressive in finding patterns, for sure. This last segment is editorial in nature. So this is Luna's opinion, but it's related to that point of, hey, the community is being listened to by research, the public, that sort of thing. So recently, the US government has been releasing some reports and soliciting more feedback as well. Before I go into the details, I do ask listeners to use their own discernment when participating in government research or surveys with our disability given historical oppression. I personally hesitate to identify myself in a survey, particularly when I can trace the funds back to an organization that I feel is more interested in erasure than support.
Oh, okay. And we're about to get my opinion now here on some stuff. Are you talking about Autism Speaks, maybe?
Yes. Yes, I am. And while I've not personally done extensive research and a deep dive into this, my intuition is just screaming alarm bells at me to be very wary of this. But I'll share the news because, you know, it's notable.
It's worthy of discussing.
Yes. So from a press release from November of 2023, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, HHS, has released the 2022 report to Congress on supportive services for individuals with autism. So, by the way, Congress funded this and asked for it, okay, if you haven't gathered that already. So this report highlights needs and opportunities for strengthening supportive services for individuals with autism. There are several critical areas of need, including long wait lists for services, the services cliff experienced after high school, workforce shortages, services for older adults, as well as racial, ethnic, and geographic disparities in access to quality autism services and care. Okay, I'm good with that. Coordination of federal autism activities and engagement with service providers and the autism community is achieved through avenues such as the Interagency Autism Coordinating Committee, IACC, and the activities of the National Autism Coordinator. This helps to ensure that federal departments and agencies are responsive to the evolving needs of the community in their efforts to continuously enhance supportive services for people on the autism spectrum and their families. Okay, so on the surface, good, right? Okay. So the IACC has also released a request soliciting the public's feedback on a survey related to these ongoing efforts. That's it, unbiased, except for my warning of discernment. So Shelli, what are your thoughts?
Okay, I haven't done a deep dive into this particular committee. I'm more motivated to do so now that we've talked about it, even though it had kind of been on my radar for a few weeks after what you said. First thing we're going to do is at the end of this episode, you should see a link to a poll, and it's going to ask if you've taken this survey or not. It's just going to be yes or no. And if I can figure out how to do it, there should also be a way for you to send us a voice message. But I think that's only going to be available on Spotify audio. So I'll confirm that. If that's true, I'm going to leave all of these words here. And if it's a lie, these words are going to leave. Now, I will say I'm skeptical only because I worked for the federal government for a long time. And I worked at a place that really benefited from my skills, my pattern recognition skills, my just mainly that, but other skills I have too, but working well in a crisis also. So pattern recognition skills plus working well in a crisis. I don't know. Y'all can guess all day what I used to do, and I'm not going to tell you. But it took me, and I was, when I think I'm getting a little emotional thinking about it now, it took me 3 tries to pass the polygraph. And it was a very anxiety-inducing, stressful ordeal. And I've never in my life felt so bad about myself than after leaving that exam. And I knew that I had not lied as far as what I understood a lie to be. And I know now that me trying to understand what they really wanted me to say, I had such trouble with it because of my communication differences, because I'm fucking autistic. And I fully believe now that they knew that, or at least could tell, because it's not just a polygraph examination that they give you. They ask you about helping in situations, which is why I kept making that face during the whole bystander thing. Like, they did a whole psych eval workup on me. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, they did a psych eval on me that I never got to see the results of. I'm sure I could probably request it now, but it's probably classified and I don't have a clearance anymore. I mean, it's my information. I'll be able to get it. I guess what I'm saying is, given I'm about to get really squirrely here. This is like super woo, and I don't think this is true. I just don't like patterns I'm seeing. Okay. We know that enrollment in the military is down. We know that a lot of people who had previously been in the military were neurodivergent and are heavily recruited, because one path of neurodivergence is to like go to college and excel and then burn out. But the other path is to be like that burnout in school and you don't have options. And so then the military is your option, right? And so I just have this, we keep validating what an autistic person looks like. If they're just going to keep co-opting that for nefarious purposes and a draft.
And not even the military industrial complex.
Right.
Our government and other governments do not have a very good track record with protecting disabled individuals.
Right. And so I'm on the fence though, because if there are more of us who realize that we're in this bucket, we said it multiple times during this interview that the criteria is subjective, but if we had like a photo imagery, right?
Unbiased, scientific. Yeah.
Correct. Because here's the thing. How can I be wrong when I meet strangers who understand me almost completely based on just how I organize my brain or how I say I work in the world? That if it was like really such a troubling thing, I wouldn't be able to just meet person after person after person after person. And I know I'm probably more likely to run into those people because of the way I organize my life. Not online.
I'm sure there's some confirmation bias about like who
100%.
is in our family and our social circles, career paths, of course, but
Anyway, I don't know. That's just, it makes me upset. And anybody who's listening to this who has ever failed a polygraph and been made to feel like you were a crime lord, human trafficking terrorist, international woman of mystery.
well,
I felt
yes,
that.
let's not carry that further. Release that. You are not that. I will say, if we're going to rat hole, I'm just going to say the rest of the rat hole. Autism speaks as eugenics.
Yes.
The origin of defining autism came with Asperger's, which came out of Nazi Germany. And there was a huge murder of disabled humans by the Nazis.
Murders.
Every which direction I go in my family, there is a whitewashing.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a unique experience to my family.
Well, we're a family, babe.
Yeah, so I bet someone in our neurospicy zebra community has looked into this more deeply, though. So on that note, though, I think we've definitely spent enough time on this particular special interest today.
Yes, I need to go get involved with one of my other ones. I have to like do a knitting pattern that I'm gonna invent. So yes, that's a wrap for the 2023 wrap up. Thank you so much for listening to the Hacking Hypermobility podcast today.
Yes, and would you please take a minute to like, share, follow, leave us a review, comment on whatever platform you're listening on. Join us on our socials. We really appreciate it. It helps to grow the message.
Yes, and if any of these topics sparked ideas or questions, and you would like to hear us discuss something, send an email to our producer Tiffany at hackinghypermobility.com or tag us on all of our socials, which we will link in the show notes and are all over our page.
Yep, and you can just go to our website hackinghypermobility.com if you forget. That landing spot will take you to anything. And just a quick reminder, the preceding information provided in this podcast episode is for educational purposes only and should not be considered as medical advice. Consult with your healthcare professionals for personalized guidance on managing your health. Again, thank you so much for listening.
Yes, have a great day, zebras. We're wishing you healthy hypermobility. Bye.
Bye. Let's bitchin'.
Camaro.